Chapter 2. Grace must be believable. Grace is one of the most familiar words in Christian language, and one of the most fragile. It is sung, quoted, summarized, and often misunderstood. For many, grace has become weightless. A pleasant idea, a spiritual relief, a theological shortcut that resolves tension too quickly. It forgives without cost. It heals without history. It comforts without confrontation. But that is not the grace the Gospels proclaim. Biblical grace must be believable, not merely beautiful. And believability requires context. This is why the Gospel of Matthew refuses to introduce grace abstractly. Before Jesus speaks a word of forgiveness or touches a wounded life, Matthew grounds grace in generations of human reality. He tells us where Jesus comes from, so we will understand what grace is willing to carry. Grace that floats above history cannot save those crushed by it. The problem with clean stories: human beings instinctively curate their stories. We emphasize growth and minimize failure. We highlight victories and soften losses. We reshape memory so the present appears inevitable, even noble. This instinct carries into religious storytelling, where faith is often presented as a steady ascent. The series of correct decisions rewarded by divine approval. A scripture consistently resists its impulse when God tells his story. He does not sanitize it. He preserves the fractures, he names the detours, he allows tension to remain unresolved for generations. Why? Because grace that arrives without cost feels naive, and mercy that is not weighted feels cheap. A spotless lineage would have suggested that salvation emerged naturally from human virtue. A broken one tells a truer story, that salvation required interruption, patience, and sacrifice. Grace that survives time. The genealogy of Jesus stretches across centuries of waiting. Promises are made to Abraham and appear delayed. Kings rise and fall. Faithfulness flickers and dims. Entire generations live and die without seeing resolution. The covenant seems at times preserved by nothing more than fragile obedience in divine restraint. This is not inefficiency, it is formation. Grace matures through time. It absorbs disappointment. It learns to remain faithful when outcomes are unclear. It waits while human beings repeat mistakes, and we learn truths already revealed. By the time Jesus is born, grace is not an idea. It is a history. This is why mercy spoken by Jesus carries authority. It has been rehearsed across generations of failure and preservation. It has survived exile, compromise, and silence. When Jesus forgives, he does so as the heir of patience. Why outsiders matter. One of the most striking features of Jesus' genealogy is not merely its brokenness, but its inclusiveness. Women appear where they typically would not. Gentiles appear where they were not expected. Individuals marked by social, moral, or ethnic exclusion are named without apology. This is not a corrective gesture. It is a declaration. Grace is not reacting to human failure. It is revealing God's intention from the beginning. Redemption was never meant to be narrow. Israel was chosen, not as an endpoint, but as a vessel. The inclusion of outsiders in the Messiah's lineage signals what the Messiah himself will later proclaim. The kingdom of God is not preserved by boundaries. It is extended to faith. Grace must be believable, not only to the righteous, but to the rejected. Why the law is not ignored, believable grace does not bypass the law. It fulfills it by confronting its limits. The law exposes sin, defines holiness, and establishes order. But it cannot heal memory, restore trust, or undo shame. It can restrain behavior. It cannot redeem lineage. The genealogy of Jesus quietly reveals this tension. Certain figures in his lineage stand under legal suspicion or exclusion. Their presence is not explained away. The law is allowed to speak, and then grace is allowed to answer. This prepares the reader for the ministry of Jesus, who does not abolish the law but completes its purpose. Grace does not contradict justice. It carries justice to its necessary conclusion. A grace that ignores the law feels permissive. A grace that passes through the law feels costly. Where the cross depends on credibility. If grace is unbelievable, the cross becomes unnecessary. A spotless story does not require crucifixion. A moral example does not need blood. A gentle teacher does not need a grave, but a broken story does. The cross makes sense only when salvation is understood as intervention rather than reward. Jesus does not die. Because humanity is confused, he dies. Because humanity is fractured beyond self-repair. The genealogy prepares us for this truth. It tells us that the problem Jesus comes to address is not superficial. It is generational. It is embedded. It is inherited. Grace must be strong enough to enter that depth where it cannot save. Grace is presence, not escape. Perhaps the most difficult truth the genealogy teaches is this: grace does not remove us from history, it joins us within it. Jesus does not arrive as an outsider to the human condition. He does not bypass ancestry, culture, or consequence. He is born into them. This is why grace feels different in the Gospels. It does not hover above suffering, it touches it. It does not speak from a distance, it speaks from within. Grace is believable because it is embodied. What this means for the reader. If grace were offered only to the morally consistent, it would be inaccessible to most. If redemption required a clean beginning, hope would be rare. But the genealogy of Jesus tells a different story. It tells the reader that God does not wait for perfection before acting. He works through complexity. He redeems without denial. He enters stories already in progress. Grace does not ask you to pretend the past did not happen. It asks you to trust that God has not abandoned it. Where we go next. Grace becomes believable when it is traced through real lives. In the chapters that follow, you'll step into those lives. Beginning with Judah, a man whose failure should have ended the line, and Tamar, a woman whose righteousness emerges through scandal. Their stories are not warnings. They are foundations. Because before grace saved the world, it must first survive a family.